So Margaret MacLean has been very active in PEACHAM. She's part of that state, a member of the Alternative Governance PEACHAM Act 46 Study Committee. Also, I would include former Vermont Principal of the Year, and at one point in time was a member of our State Board of Education. We appreciate you making the effort to be here. Dan MacArthur is a member of the Act 46 Study Committee and has been a longtime member of the School Board in Marlborough. To my right is John Castle, Superintendent of the North Country Supervisory Union, and then Scott Thompson, who is a member of the Washington Central Act 46 Study Committee. So in no particular order, I'm going to hand the mic and then have you each make your about 5 minutes of comments, and then again we'll open it up. So Margaret?
Thank you everyone for coming today. I'm going to speak for 5 minutes, but it could probably take a lot longer. So I'm going to speak very briefly, and then perhaps when there's a working group, if there's something that is specific that you'd be interested in, we could talk about it in a little table group later. I have a 10-page, well, it's a one-pager that describes 10 steps you can take in terms of developing an alternative structure application. And it outlines the model that the town of PEACHAM went through to get to the point of deciding that that's what we were going to do, and then in terms of gathering the evidence for that application. So I'll give that to Fletcher, and I made 25 copies, and it can get passed around. I can also put it as a part of the Google group. There is a Google group of 110 people who are from 26 different supervisory unions. And if you'd like to be part of that Google group and you're not, then I just need your email and I can add you to that Google group. And the Google group is a resource of people who are struggling with this law and finding a way to meet the requirements of the law in their specific situation, and we're there just to help each other. So feel free to join up with that. In terms of our, will you tell me when the 5 minutes is up? Sure. Yeah. In terms of our process in PEACHAM, we had a committee, which was a working committee that met 4 times over the course of a year, but did a lot of independent work to gather evidence of how we currently meet the goals of the law and how we plan on meeting the goals of the law. We looked at 4 options as part of that. 2 were related to merger and 2 were not involving merger. One of the big pieces we did was a census, which clarified that actually we do not as a community have declining enrollment. We have steady, slightly growing enrollment, and with our 0 to 3-year-old population, that's maintained. It's not about to decline immediately. And we looked at student achievement. Kathy, when you spoke about student achievement in Wyndham not having the numbers, so not being able to publicize your success stories, we looked at a 15-year history of student achievement and aggregated data over that 15-year period, which gave us larger numbers. So you may only have very small numbers in a certain grade, but longitudinally, you may be able to get data which tells a story of student achievement. So that's something to consider. So we looked at performance, we looked at the census, we looked at declining enrollment, and then we looked at where we stood against school quality standards. So in looking at how we meet those school quality standards, we found that we met the school quality standards. There's a document that you can make that case against. It's not comparing you to other places, it's showing how you individually meet those school quality standards. And then we made a list of about 12 or 13 things that we could do to better meet the goals of the law. And that's not just us individually as a town district, that's us in cooperation with partners in a supervisory union. We will be part of a supervisory union. So we can do some things individually, we will do some things with partners. What's been confusing for us is our neighbors have not made a decision yet. In making an alternative structure application, it's really important that your intent is clear. So having community consensus about what your community wants and doesn't want is really important. And a survey or an exit poll or how you get that is a key issue. Do you want to be a K-6 school, a K-12 school? If you do that, and your community supports that, and there's evidence that your community supports that, then before you even talk to anyone, that intent has to be clear, so that that's how you enter any negotiation, enter any 706B committee. And part of the problem that we're dealing with statewide is the fact that people got into these 706B committees way before their time, before they'd had any community conversations about what their community wanted. So there was no clear intent when you sat down at the table of what you were willing to negotiate with and were not about to give up. In terms of resources, it was mentioned about the small school study. The TOM license study, which I can post to the list, is the study from Northern New York, which looked at the drastic economic impact of school closure. It's a study from the 80s, but it's written about rural upstate New York, and so it's very similar the landscape was very similar to the way it is in Vermont now. And the impact of consolidation would be similar here to what it was in upstate New York. So it's a great study to look at.
That's it, Margaret, if you want to
Okay,
add that.
I have one other resource that's helpful, and that's a document published last year by Voices for Vermont Children, which has a website and is in Montpelier and is an advocacy organization for children. And it has data which shows that about small schools and how children in poverty perform better in small schools than in large schools in Vermont, and how graduation rates of children in poverty are higher in our small schools than if they are in our larger schools. So that's another study to reference in an application. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dan.
Thanks, Margaret. I think we owe Margaret, all of us owe her a debt of gratitude. Without her, many of us would not be where we are today. She's coordinated this whole thing statewide. Yeah, poo, poo, poo. Yeah, that's right. That's why we love her, right? Thank you. I'm going to stress a couple of things that Margaret's already pointed out. The town of Marlborough started over 2 years ago working on this. First thing we did was we asked the school board to switch from a 3-person to a 5-person board, which took a vote of the town, which they did. At that vote, 2 more people were elected, allowing those of us not to have to kill ourselves who were on the school board. We could somewhat divvy up the work. So that was, we're glad we did that. The next thing we did was we had a community survey, which Margaret has already pointed out is so valuable. If you haven't done it, you need to immediately do that, because you can use that as good information, not only to go to the state with, but it can really help with all the decisions that your town is making. What do people really want to see their school look like? What are the really crucial things? So that's been great for us to have that been behind us. We then involved ourselves not only with our own full-time Act 46 committee, which was basically studying alternatives, but we also were part of a study committee with a grant from the state, supervisor union-wide, and part of a 706B merger committee, which looked only at merging, did not branch out from that, because we knew we were at the same time exploring Act 46. But some of that information has been good. Fletcher asked this morning, you know, what do 706B committees come out with for savings or for increased educational opportunities? Well, essentially zip. I think I would have said if I'd had the chance, and I'm saying it now, not much there. So, and you all know that. But really, what I'd like to stress more, Margaret's put together this wonderful sheet of paper that you can have access to about what the alternative structure HES proposal is going to look like. And that's crucial, and anybody who finds additions or changes to that should make sure we should work on that together. But I think as important is going to be the procedure. How are you going to go about doing this? And I guess I got to say, as a long-term longtime school board member. When people come to me and they want to sit at the same table, then I feel like talking to them. And when they come to me as if I am Hitler or whatever, then I'm not, less inclined. That's a simple human interaction. An alternative governance structure is going to be a part of a supervisory union. In fact, it's going to be a supervisory union. Everybody should know that. The rules aren't yet completely finalized, but they've been drastically simplified. Application for AGS is going to be made by your supervisory union. So you need to first get your school board to vote to explore AGS, and then get your supervisory union on board with that. And we know there are multiple examples of superintendencies which are part of this and which are really oppositional to this. But that is so crucial. And I think if you're in a community that is currently split over this and is divided, and there's animosity between the various different groups, you got to get beyond that, because it ain't going to happen otherwise. And I don't know how to say it other than to say, use the community survey, use the fact that everybody has the same goals in mind. The same goals are to do the best job we can for our kids. And if you can go to your school board, even if you feel like you have been accused of being Hitler-esque by them or vice versa, the school board, and I also think you can say to the school board, you may be in favor of merging, and that's fine. But if the town votes not to do that, we've got to have other alternatives here and say, okay, so now is the time to start looking at what an AGS proposal is going to look like, even if the school board isn't completely on board with that. We need to be responsive to the members of the community. So I guess that's my main thing is use Margaret's process. She's got the process wonderfully figured out, but the procedure has got to be person to person. And I think if you're not having luck dealing with your school board and your supervisory union, use the kids. That we all have the same goals here as school board members and everybody else. Use that as the way to say, okay, we need to start branching out and looking at what an AGS is going to look like with our supervisory unions, and make it a person-to-person thing, and pull yourselves and your own egos out of it if that's at all possible. So anyway, good luck with it.
Can I say one thing? Yeah, let's go that way.
Good morning. I'm John Castle, Superintendent of Schools for North Country Supervisory Union. That is 14 different districts, including our Union High School and Union Junior High School. I don't even make the decision for all our snow days in each of our towns. And I'm okay with that. I don't have any problem with that. We're that big block that on some maps is all white, and sometimes in this map here it's all yellow at the top of the state, bordering Quebec. We participated in a very active community engagement process from about October through March until our annual meeting, in which we really benefited a lot from the support from a lot of people. And Susan Clark from Middlesex was somebody who worked very closely with us in terms of designing surveys and an engagement process, meetings in a box. And we very purposely went out to our community and didn't try to sell them anything. We didn't try to sell them the preferred model. We didn't even try to sell them the alternative model, which we suspected was the disposition of our communities and certainly seemed to be the disposition of our board. But we very much wanted it to be an authentic process. And I think that was very, very important for us. We had an immense amount of data that we collected. All of that clearly indicates that the overwhelming disposition of our communities that they want to stay a supervisory union. That wasn't really a surprise to us, but I think it was a genuine and an authentic process. It was not because we were trying to induce people into one direction or persuade them because of carrots or sticks or anything. It was really about what is good governance, what do they want for their schools, and clearly we solicited a lot of other information about how to improve our schools and be more effective and efficient and equitable and those kinds of things. There's no question we have work to be done in our schools to be more equitable with regard to, first and foremost, student programming and services and supports, but also equity with regard to how we treat our employees. I mean, we have some cases where support staff 6 miles down the road are making a different wage of $1.50 to $2 difference doing the same job. And that doesn't seem right. And I think we've gained a lot of ground in the last couple of years. And I actually, and I know it's probably not popular to say this in this room, I have to thank Act 46.
Yes.
We are more unified now than we've ever been,
Right.
thanks to Act 46.
I agree.
And it really, and I hear the stories in this room about how polarizing the process can be. It would be an absolute nightmare for us if we were trying to push consolidation and centralization. It would pit communities against communities and board members against board members. What I'm very thankful for right now is that with the principals I work with and boards, we do have a very common vision for the direction of our supervisory union. We do have a very common sense of purpose in our work together. And there is no polarization. There is a strong sense of identity and unity as a supervisory union, as a community, with that understanding that there needs to be some autonomy at the local level. I would argue that in the state of Vermont, and probably elsewhere, but if you think of our motto of freedom and unity, I think a multi-district supervisory union captures that better than anything else. I think it parallels what we try to balance in terms of states' rights and federal rights, and there's a balancing act. We need each other to work together. We do need to share resources. We do need to build capacity by collaborating. So none of this is about being provincial or being these little fiefdoms on their own or isolating people or not dealing with issues of equity. It really is about respecting the democratic process, engaging our public in an authentic way and supporting that engagement and increasing that. If anything, we want to increase public engagement and participation, not decrease it. So I think a multi-district supervisory union can be very effective. The law, in my opinion, is very clear. It clearly states alternative structure, a supervisory union with member districts. And what I reject is that there have been members of the legislature, and I think sometimes I feel the message from our agency of education is to bend the intent of the law. I think the intent of the law was clear, that it was to allow flexibility and to allow for supervisory unions. And so I applaud the many voices that are gathered here today. I applaud the continued communications that happen outside of this meeting via email and other ways. I do think we need to continue to collaborate and communicate across the state. The goals of the law are laudable. The law itself is contradictory. All right, if you're going to have equity, you may actually spend more money. That's what we are finding, and we're okay with that. We did centralize special ed with some reluctance from some of our boards, but I do believe overall that is a better thing for us because we have some communities that, because of their poverty level, are more challenged than others in terms of the percentage of students with need. And I do think we are stronger working together and sharing that cost. However, with transportation, we conducted a formal study and proved to the state that centralizing transportation would cost us $350,000 more annually. That may surprise you, but a lot of that had to do with leveling salaries and also more coordination. A lot of this does push increased centralized coordination and authority. And some folks have stated some research out there. There's plenty of research out there around consolidation of schools that say initial cost savings often occur, but when you factor in change of transportation and centralized bureaucracies tend to grow. All right? I'm fine with not calling snow days for everybody. Right? I am fine with principals having the authority to make decisions in their building with my support and working collaboratively with their colleagues. It doesn't have to be all decided at central office. Right? I do think boards need to work collaboratively, and there does need to be capacity at an SU level, but I do think there can be a balancing act between freedom and unity with our local districts.
Scott Thompson from CALAIS, and I am so jealous. I think what John was just saying, for me, and based on our experience in Washington Central, is it highlights the critical importance of the process of getting people in the towns, voters, citizens, students even, involved in the discussions and the decisions early on. We didn't do that. We basically climbed aboard the Consolidation Railroad from the very beginning. And it was, we didn't know what we were getting into. It was perhaps because we're so close to Montpelier, we were favored with the attentions of state agencies, Agency of Education in particular, and the statewide associations. And we had a meeting with them. The big guns were ruled out. And we were basically told, this is right after Act 46 passed and was signed into law, that this was designed for you guys. Either, sort of summing up the message, basically either you jump or we push you. And one way or the other, this is where you're headed. So, what did we know at that point? We just basically glumly resigned ourselves to the likelihood that we would wind up consolidated, even if that's not really where we wanted to go. But then this, as Dot Naylor pointed out, we hit this snag of the debt issue. And it's a technical issue, very important because it involves money, but not really central. And it's really dumb. I don't understand how the state can allow something like this to get in the way of something that they evidently really want. But not the only dumb thing that one encounters in all this. So really, what happened with us is that aboard the Consolidation Railroad, debt caused us to pull the emergency brake. But in coming up with an alternative, it was really the positive issues of education, quality of education, and local democracy that have been the governing principles of what we're trying to do in our alternative. And debt was really just like the little mold patch on the wall that leads you to discover that there's this crack in the foundation and the whole structure is compromised. For us, just from debt, everything we looked at just turned negative on Act 46. Looked at, equity. No, really, it's just giving us uniformity. Looked at quality standards. No, it just looks like it's giving us standardization instead of quality. And efficiency and the money aspects. Again, it looks like a shifting of focus from education, the actual practice of education, to the large-scale management and administration of it. So our basic idea for the alternative that we decided to pursue is essentially to turn the preferred structure inside out. And instead of having the center govern the periphery, the localities, have localities govern the center. The supervisory union model for us is, as it's described in the statutes, has been ineffective. So we're trying to put together something structurally that will allow us to do the important things that we believe we need to do. One of which is to get decision-making, give voters the possibility to make meaningful decisions, instead of just, here's your budget that you can't do anything about, and just, if you don't approve it, then your schools are you're just stuck. actually allow voters to make meaningful budget decisions on their schools. Another aspect of this is to liberate educators so that they can actually educate. As John was saying, this drift towards greater centralization and greater bureaucracy, I think is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on educators. And a lot of this is being driven by state and federal governments with their unfunded mandates. The only real counterweight to that is the people. The people need to be able to vote and to show their opposition to this trend and allow the talent and the energy of these really good people who are working in our schools to be applied to the education of our children and not to checking boxes or filing reports or meeting other requirements that are just being rained down upon them. So what we found when we came up with the draft of our alternative was that at our very last study committee meeting, there was a lawyer present. And that was the study committee meeting that it all fell apart. He basically told us that, well, your alternative concept is very interesting, but it doesn't meet the requirements of the law. You can't just shift responsibilities of local boards to a federated board. You can't do this and that. So we basically just threw up our hands and said, forget it, this is over, and fell back to the Section 9 approach. But the basic lesson that we learned there is that the law is a mess. It's a mess in several ways. It's unusable because so much of it is scattered. You get the Education Law Handbook or law book from VSBA, the big green thing. That has statutes, but it doesn't have session law in it. And session law is everywhere in this. It's also a mess because it constrains you. Basically, it's like a cattle chute, forcing you in one of two directions, either into the consolidated model or into a kind of version of what we have now, when it's possible to create something more. So, am I getting the hook? Okay, anyway, so bottom line, legislators are very important partners in all of this. This is not the end of the legislative push on Act 46 and amendments. HBAC 13 is not it. Next year, it'll be the same thing. We'll continue to try to rock the car out of the ditch. And hopefully next year or later, it will happen. And we'll actually get the flexibility that we need.
So each one of these panelists would love to make additional comments, and I'm making a decision here now not to do that. There's so much expertise here. I want to have you actually please join me in thanking all four of these wonderful people.